Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Mars Needs Moms from 2011. Mars Needs Moms is a very notable film because it's one of the biggest bombs in Hollywood history. It might be one of the biggest bombs that Disney would ever have until John Carter came around a year later, but it's still like in the top big financial disasters of all time. It cost about $150 million, but that's Hollywood math, so it's probably more. And it made about $39 million, which is not good no matter how you do math. And it was a huge disaster. It sort of ended the whole motion capture thing that Robert Zemeckis' production company, ImageMovers, had started, and then started with this small company, ImageMovers Digital, which only made about 2 movies, this and Christmas Carol with Jim Carrey, which was directed by Robert Zemeckis. This is directed by Simon Wells. You know, you'd think, because this is one of the big bombs, big disasters, this would be a really bad movie. It would be, laughably bad. It'd be so horrible, and, we'd be, joking about it, and it's so notable, you almost sort of want it to be. The thing about some of the biggest box office bombs of all time, like when we're getting into our John Carters, our Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor, Heaven's Gate, things of that nature, they're often not so laughably horrible. They're not like Cats or something. They are interesting misfires. They're films that people find interesting things in. They're films that people defend quite a bit. And Mars Needs Moms isn't like that. Let's not go that far, because I don't think anyone's really defending this movie. But it isn't. I would say probably even among those is not very good either. It doesn't really understand what its kind of focus really is. And you'd think they would, because it's sort of a simple concept, I guess, even though it's a very weird kind of idea. And it's an idea that definitely would have worked better in a book, and it's based on a book by Berkeley Breathed. I don't know how relevant Bloom County and Outland and Opus are today, but when I grew up, that was like a big comic strip I read, especially Outland, which is more concurrent with my own childhood. Although I read a lot of Bloom County collections and stuff, I really liked him quite a bit. I had no clue he wrote this book, to be honest with you, until I saw this movie. I was like, oh my god, Berkeley Breathed. And I was surprised because there's not a lot of animation based on his stuff, unless there's an animated series I'm unaware of, other than A Wish for Wings That Work, which I actually quite like. This isn't like that at all, which is unfortunate because I like his character design and how he draws, and it would be cool to see that transformed into animation. But then when we look at this in the Robert Zemeckis mocap style, we get the kind of pretty badly rendered, weird, uncanny valleyness that is these kind of films. Now, Mars Needs Moms is about a kid who is disrespecting his mom, doesn't really appreciate her, and then aliens come down and kidnap her because they basically need her consciousness or something to make robots to raise their own children. He goes with the Martian spaceship and follows them and tries to get his mom back before they basically kill her and take her parental skills, I guess, and use those parental skills to put into their mothering robots or whatever. I mean, that's the basic concept. He's going throughout and he makes this character named Gribble, and they kind of try to save his mom from basically being kind of obliterated and what they need from her taken out of her. Yeah, that's not a great premise. I think one of the biggest problems with Mars Needs Moms is it's not something I'd ever want to see a movie of. If this was live action, I wouldn't want to see a movie of this. It just doesn't sound like a great idea. Now, I know the idea, I have not read the book, but the idea in a short book I could sort of see working, but in this, it really doesn't. And the bigger problem with it is this film sort of has a huge world that it doesn't have any world building in. There's no world building with Mars, which is a whole complicated ecosystem. You're just kind of thrown into it and sort of explain some things and not explain other things. You understand this robot thing, and they're raising mostly the female Martians, and the male Martians are sent to the kind of dumpster area where he finds Gribble. But you also don't get how they set up this whole situation where all the women in Mars are basically running, but it's basically their whole industrialized society is all women, and why they have rejected the other sex. And then at the same time, you don't understand why they all respected it, what was the thing, why they live underground. That's why a Martian probe at the beginning is there, and they can never find out what's really going on with Mars because everything in Mars is below, but only in certain areas and so forth. It just doesn't really hold up very well because you don't really understand this world whatsoever, how it works, why it works that way. You're just kind of thrown into it, and it doesn't work in kind of a cool way where it's like mysterious and you think about the theories. I mean, a little, but you're just kind of thrown into this weird Martian kind of background that you're just constantly confused by. You're sitting there and you're not sure what's going on there. And I'm not even getting to the fact that Milo, who's the kid who, went to Mars to save his mom, is going around with this guy Gribble, and they're trying to figure out how to do that. Now, Milo, the interesting trivia about that is Milo was originally, the motion capture was done by Seth Green, and he was going to voice the character in sort of a kiddie voice, I guess. And then they replaced him with a child actor, which makes sense because it would have been weird with Seth Green. Although it doesn't sound that bad in the one trailer you can find. I'm not sure when they replaced him, but they replaced him at a certain point. And he looks like Seth Green, but isn't voiced by him, which is also weird. But his whole character... And that's another thing. This film gives you so little background to kind of build on. It sort of throws you in this action. Even the action isn't good. It really isn't. But when you set him up, you get that he likes zombies. He doesn't like broccoli. You don't get a lot of time with him. And then you're thrown onto this adventure. And you sort of barely get who he is. Now, the only character who's a real character in this is Gribble, who's played by Dan Fogler, who I've only seen in like movies I don't like, but I usually like him in those movies like this and Fantastic Beasts, and I'm sure I've seen him in other things, but like I actually do think he's a good actor. I'm surprised I haven't seen him in better movies because I think he has a lot of promise. And in this movie, he does do a few good scenes. I found him annoying at first, and it's really actually hard for a character who you don't like when you initially see them to an actor to sort of turn that around, and he actually does that. But he is the only character you get some background towards. You understand like why he is that certain way. You understand him as a character. Whereas Milo, you don't really know what he's going to do. You just know he's bland protagonist person and he's going to do what protagonists do, but you don't have any real sense of him as a person whatsoever. And he's the main, he's the protagonist who you were following the entire movie, and that's a huge problem. It's interesting when I think of this and even John Carter, which is another Disney film, is like they're both ambitious movies that try to do way too much, don't explain anything, and they both take place on Mars. I don't know what Disney was thinking with Mars in the early 2010s, but they clearly thought there was something there. It's also interesting their storytelling decisions are just so whacked out and terrible from people. That was Andrew Stanton, who made Finding Nemo and WALL-E, and this is Robert Zemeckis, who did Roger Rabbit and the Back to the Future movies. Well, this is from Simon Wells, really, so I guess I can't blame Robert Zemeckis on this fully, even though it was his studio and he was a producer. But you'd think that they would find a good narrative lay or a blockbustery way to present this sort of thing, and they just sort of don't. And it's not interesting. I think people could mistake what this is doing for interesting. I think if they do, they have very little taste if they mistake this for interesting, because it is not interesting. It's really sort of boring and uninteresting. The whole idea, the whole approach of it, like what exactly are they trying to prove with this sort of thing? There isn't like a real point to telling the story in this way. It just makes them feel sort of like lazy, and it, you could say Mars needs plot or Mars needs money or all those things, but it ultimately is like, if you're selling your movie, even if you have a bland protagonist, you can say, hey, Luke Skywalker is a bland protagonist. Well, I don't think that's true, but you also, understood Luke Skywalker. You understood, John Connor in the Terminator 2. You understand these protagonists who might not feel like the most exciting character in the bunch. Milo is very much not an exciting character. You don't understand what drives him, and he doesn't even understand that he loves his mom, and he's like 9 or 10, so it's super weird until like almost 2/3 of the way through the movie. He's like, oh, my mom loves me, that's why she does all those things. And I'm like, clearly your mom has not been doing a good job, because holy shit, dude, empathy. It's just like, he is really bad. Part of me doesn't get like who this movie was for, why you would make this a big blockbuster, because that's the biggest problem I have with it. It's almost like, it's not like, because this isn't Zemeckis' kind of directorial auteur big statement. It's not a star vehicle that went out of control. It's not a property that had been in development hell forever or something. It's a Berkeley breathed book that certainly apparently did well, and then taken by a director who, is notable for being like H.G. Wells' great grandson. and did the Time Machine movie that I didn't see, and did all of the Amblimation movies and Prince of Egypt. It's like such a misnomer to all that, and it kind of sticks out from them because it doesn't fit in with the major disasters of Hollywood history, the things that make Hollywood movies go completely off. And it also has nothing to do with Hollywood movies because it functionally, it's not interesting in an artistic weird way, and I'm sure there's somebody who's going to make one of those. I've actually seen very few of those for this, which really stands for like how uninteresting it truly is. Whereas John Carter, you see people defending it now and then, which they're wrong, but whatever. This is just fairly unremarkable in what it's doing. And I think also the motion capture, it's interesting when I think of the mocap movie I actually like, which is Monster House. I like Monster House quite a bit. But what's different about Monster House and this is Monster House tries to make those character designs look like cartoons. And in Mars Needs Moms, they try to make them realistic. And it looks horrible. And I think motion capture, I don't like these mocap movies. I don't like how they like move the camera around like crazy. They do all these things. Like I think the only one anyone likes is Monster House, really. They never understood like how to fully use it with animation, despite the fact that when this launched, Zemeckis acted like animation would be outdated and his stupid, mocap thing was going to take over. Mocap works when you and a lot of people have said it in their reviews of this film, but it works when you do stylized things. But I would say what works with it is actually when you use more animation and stop trying to make it look like supposedly a live action movie. You're never going to make it look like a live action movie. And the fact that, you do still have an animation director who apparently knew Zemeckis for a very long time, doing this kind of a film, you'd think that would really work for it. You think that would work out for this film, but it really doesn't. I don't know that's Zemeckis' involvement or he, since he was more gearing towards live action with his previous film. But when these films used animation in Monster House, it worked and it doesn't look as weird. And even watching clips of Monster House, because I was like, maybe I'm wrong about Monster House, maybe it was the script that was so great. It was the script that was really great, that was part of it, but it was also that the designs looked more like cartoons, so my brain accepts them. But seeing like Joan Cusack not being able to emote properly because you put all this CG crap on her face is really a problem. It's a problem for her as an actress, and it's a problem for the movie that we can't, get that kind of, empathy through it. Actually, the problem with this whole film is empathy, because you think Mars Needs Moms. Why would they need moms? They need moms because moms, sort of in the traditional gender sense, teach you empathy. But in the real sense of this movie, this movie needed a mom, and this movie needed empathy to get you to care about it, because that was the biggest problem. And the only reason this movie ever works with Gribble is because you understand what happens to his mom. And that scene actually brought me into it, and I did care, but I only cared about him, and he's like, the sidekick or whatever. So this film, ultimately, I think the problem with Mars Needs Moms is it just doesn't work at all. It's an ugly character design, the animation isn't very good, and the story doesn't work. Ultimately, when you're watching it as an audience member, you're like, what does this film offer me? And to be honest with you, I don't think it offers you very much. It's definitely the worst of the mocap movies. Polar Express revolts me more. Even Beowulf I'd put up with more than this, or Christmas Carol I like certain moments in, but this is there's so little to even attach myself to. There's so little to even empathize with. It doesn't work on an animation an interesting oh, this is kind of weird sort of thing. It just doesn't really work. Now that I've finally seen, I guess I've seen all the mocap movies, it more makes me understand why, before this came out, Disney was we're not doing any ImageMovers digital movies anymore. And, thank God, because first they were going to do that Yellow Submarine thing, and I'm really glad that never happened, that Robert Zemeckis was going to direct, where they brought in actors to play the Beatles. That sounds horrendous, and I'm so glad that didn't happen. But with Mars Needs Moms, if this is the last gasp, which they actually understood before they finished it, this is the end of motion capture, possibly. Maybe they, really were narcissistic enough to believe this wouldn't end. But if you're thinking, this is the end, this is the last chance we're going to have to make these kind of movies, what are we going to do to prove it? And then you sit there and you watch Mars Needs Moms and take it under that context, it is a huge giant failure, because it totally fails in making you understand why you would want to continue on making these type of movies, and why you would want this team of people trying to make these kind of movies as well. It's like two signs to the universe that this really shouldn't be happening anymore. And I think Mars Needs Moms certainly kind of cements the idea that ImageMovers Digital shouldn't be resuscitated from the grave and should absolutely stay there. So if you have seen Mars Needs Moms and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Alright, so if you have seen ImageMovers Digital and you would like to talk about it, then comment. Wow, I really did that.